Wait for him to step in. Perfect. Well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. My childhood, throughout my childhood, my grandfather was a big role model to me. He was a man who could always be found working with his tools and working with his hands, whether that's repairing furniture or working on his lawnmower. His time spent was by being a man who was a maker. He was an engineer by trade, and through this mentality of working, he passed on skills to my father and me. Not just skills, but also an understanding of tools and how to use them. Their influence as a kid, my father and my grandfather, both drove me to dream up things as well as think about how to repair things since an early age. I was always the kid who would draw up the rocket ships and cars and the tree houses and forts and the suits of armor and the castles, and I would write them on loose pieces of paper and I would tape them up on my walls. And as a passion, as a kid, I found that passion has not left me as I've grown into being a high school student. Their influence was very important, but I also understand that many people don't have a similar influence as a child. Their influence may be different, where their parents were never the type of people to engage with their house and or engage with things around them. But I believe that everybody can embrace the creativity and the engagement that comes with working with your hands. No matter who you are, you can find a part of the world that you can change as well as you can engage with. This brings the challenge of the process. You see, when you are working with your hands, you can always see the beginning, the recognition of the problem, but you can always see the end goal, and the difference between that is what I call the process. And that's one of the most difficult things to learn. Now, whether the process is something that is fixed, whether it's something that is made or something that has failed, the process embodies the steps taken and the motions felt along the way, as well as the vision of where you are going at the end. Now, everything mankind has ever done has to be put work in to accomplish a goal in the end. Whether it's to find food or water or find shelter for the night, ever since God put us on the earth, we have had to work with our hands. And in our modern world, we have grown into a disconnect. There's a disconnect between us, the consumers, and the producers. We outsource our needs to manufacturers and producers. And yes, I understand that having to grow and find and make everything in your life is neither easy nor realistic. But I believe that there is an issue and a disconnect between our modern lives and the things that reinforce it and build it. The self-repair and maker lifestyle that my grandfather grew up in was and is not the standard anymore. Now, many people might label this as laziness, but I believe it is more apt to define this disconnect as a disenchantment with effort and a disenchantment with the process that I so vividly think is important. Now, throughout this past year, I've engaged with hard work, and I have strived to be more self-sufficient in the way that I approach my life. I've sought to engage my world and fight the complacency of our culture. And through this fight, I have discovered that the process that we take should be the focus of our time rather than the problem. See, in our modern lives, we have sought to eliminate the process. We have sought to get rid of the time it takes to make something, but just because it's uncomfortable. There's a consumerist inclination to hire a man to fix your TV, or to mow your lawn, or to fix your pipes. You can pay a man $150 to set up your router correctly. And I agree that there are some issues that are too difficult for a homeowner to fix. For instance, a roof over your head that is an infinitely big project for one man. But we have created a dependence on these services. We have created a dependence on the manufacturers that support our lives. And that has led to a stagnation of our imaginations and a fear of failure, as well as leaving us without any growth in how we understand our world around us. This dependence has been noticed as a current problem that many people are wrestling with is the technology that we have in our hands. In our pockets, we have a smartphone. The smartphone is a click away from anything that you can need ever. The development of the internet and alike technologies have not always served us, as is served to create more of a disconnect between where we recognize the problem and the solution. If we are to fight this, if we are to fight against the complacency of our culture, dare say rebel against it, we need to get down and dirty. We need to get our hands covered in grease, hands covered in grease, our arms in the mud, our faces covered with paint, and we need to engage our world and face our problems head on. Many people would see that this lack of engagement is because the process is flawed. I don't believe it's this way. I believe that the process is misunderstood and we have failed to engage it. We have failed to engage the difference between and the work in between our problems and our solutions. This comes with practice in terms of making sure that you can deal with the process. It comes with practice, and I could never write a speech that would replace the experience that you can get with working with your hands. But today I can show you a few things to help you on your journey. Now, one of the large problems people have with working with your hands is its daunting nature. You work with your hands and you see a leaky faucet and you think, I can't fix that. Now, I would take an example that everybody has to deal with, the oil in your car. Let's say we're driving along in our car. I don't have a car, but I pretend my mom's is mine. So I'm driving along and I see the check engine light is on. Many people would take the car at that moment to be serviced at a mechanic shop. But I believe that by doing that, you're removing the process that you can take time to engage and grow your imaginations. Now, I would go and I would check the fluids in your car. I would check the oil and I would notice that perhaps the oil is low and it needs to be changed. Now, still at this point, many people would take their car to be serviced, and if I was busy, and as many people are, I would too. But if I had a free Saturday to get my car serviced and I would drop my car off for the afternoon, I could take an hour and a half. I could take an hour and a half of my time to sit in my garage and I change my oil myself. See, with a bottle of oil, a bucket, about an hour and a half of your time, as well as some guy on YouTube, you can always find a solution to working on your car. See, when we break down a problem, like we do with finding different specific issues to deal with, when we break down a problem, it removes the imposing nature that many people are afraid of. It helps build confidence in how to engage with our world. And it is a very important mentality for engineers and makers alike. Now, for people beyond the engineering field, the process is still vitally important, so that way we can grow our imaginations in changing the way that we live and we consume. Excuse me. Now, this year I've worked on an engine. Mr. Cooper was so gracious to provide me with an old engine CAD laying in his garage, and he let me take it apart. Though I myself have had to take many breaks on it, it still to this day is not done, and despite the amount of time I've had to work on it, I began to get frustrated with the way that the process was unfolding. Whether it was a part that was difficult to take off, for instance, one of the manifolds or where the exhaust comes out was rusted over and wouldn't budge for weeks. But by taking time and stepping back, I was able to figure out what was wrong with it. I was frustrated by the process, but by isolating the difficulties that I had, I was able to take the time that I needed to understand what was happening in my world and in front of me, and use my imagination and creativity to engage with it. Now, a great book that I read addresses this very directly. Now, I would recommend you read the whole book, but to me, it is a very hard read. But the way that the book that I read was The Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. This was written by Robert M. Pirsig. He was an engineer and a technical writer, and he described the issues we face and the daunting nature of hands-on work as gumption traps. Gumption's a funny word, but the way that he defines it is by a combination of common sense, shrewdness, and a sense of initiative. He further goes on to divide these gumption traps into setbacks and hang-ups. By understanding the difference between them, it makes the process much easier. The setbacks being external factors that come and make the process harder, whether that be a lack of knowledge that you have, or the environment around you and you're unable to deal with the issue in front of you, or whether it be hang-ups, internal issues that you have to deal with, for instance, getting frustrated or letting your emotions get the better of you in terms of working with mechanical work. The differences between the setbacks and hang-ups are very vital, because understanding that taking time to step back from the engine that I was working on, I was able to understand that the process that I was experiencing, though vital, I was not using my creativity. I was not using different ways to find a solution. And I believe that this same creativity is underused in our everyday life. There's a great TED Talk that Mr. Spector showed us this year that deals with creativity and how the education system has attempted to remove that from our modern lives. But I believe that you can use this in your ordinary life in many ways. Mr. Cooper, the busy man that he is as our head of school, took time out of his year to help me with the engine, as well as do an interview with me. He asked me, I asked him as a kid what drove him to be interested in engineering. He said, there were a few times where a lot more was broken within a piece of machinery than I knew. And I just started taking it apart, not knowing what I was doing. And it didn't work when I was done taking it apart. But it taught me next time how to do things right by trial and error. This love of tinkering is common among many makers as well as engineers. Admittedly, we are engineers, so it is our hobby and our career. But I believe that is still a part of our lives that engaging with our world can be vital to everybody, no matter who you are and what profession you are in. This love of tinkering is best exemplified by my aunt's friend, Jenny. Jenny's story is an interesting one. She graduated with an engineering degree from MIT, but decided not to go into the engineering field. Instead, spend a few years working with her hands doing woodworking. This woodworking was driven by a passion of taking apart and building things. She would take commissions and build special and custom pieces for people. But after a few years, it wasn't financially sustainable, and she moved into a management position at a product design company. She thought that this position would allow her to get hands-on and love that process that she has enjoyed so much. This job that she had, though, wore her out. Her love of the process drove her to move on past that into a infographic design job, a much different turn from the engineering degree she originally started with, but it allowed her to start from the ground up building and figuring out problems and solutions to her world. This mentality that Mr. Cooper as well as Jenny have is important for makers, but I believe it's also a good mentality for all of us to step into and understand. Now, you may be asking, why do I care about this? But the center of our capstone, the entire program, is what do you love? I personally love the process. I love finding a way to see the solution and finding my way and pathfinding to it. Excuse me. Now, this speech that I'm giving here today is to describe what is good about this, what is good about the process. The Bible department defines goodness as that which reflects the nature and character of God. The nature and character of God. This mantra has been applied to many parts of our capstone, whether it be the interviews, whether it be the experiences that we would do, but it has also been taken up by the school and used in many ways. This goodness that I have sought to find has drove me to find verses that would help me. And it states straight in the Word of God, that there's nothing better for a man to do than to eat, to drink, and to enjoy his toil. This too is from the hand of God. This was written in Ecclesiastes, which we read this year in senior seminar, chapter 2, verse 24. But this process, the toil that the Bible is talking about, is the same toil that we have tended to disengage with in the process. We've decided, I believe, that it's important to engage and be happy with your world. And if you are engaging, the Word of God states it clearly, you will enjoy what you are doing. For me, this has been always working with my hands. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Romans chapter 1. This goodness, as stated in the Word, is very important for all of us. As in our modern lives, we have discovered that there is a disconnect between what is produced and what is consumed. And by engaging and enjoying the work that goes in between, it is very important for us it is very good for us to engage with our world in that way, as it promotes the creativity and imaginations of the people. This year I've worked on several projects. In here I worked on the CNC machine, and I developed a spoil board which prevents damages from occurring when you make mistakes. I have worked on the engine, like I said, with Mr. Cooper, as well as I have fixed a 3D printer and learned how to 3D model. These different processes, though I myself am a perfectionist to my detriment, these different projects have really reinforced what the process truly means, and has shown that how I love it. By this way, so I can love the process, I have given myself no deadlines. I've given myself no deadlines to finish the engine, but instead have taken time to enjoy working with my hands in the moment. I found ways to be self-sufficient and love the process. And I believe that if you try to find ways to engage with your world, you can too. Thank you very much.